Dr. James Mitchell rubbed his tired eyes and stared at the black stone sitting behind the glass. It was 3 in the morning on Europa, one of Jupiter's frozen moons. The research station was quiet. Everyone else had gone to bed hours ago. James had been studying this mysterious object for 3 years now. 3 long years of nothing. The thing just sat there, humming quietly like a broken refrigerator. It drove him crazy. The artifact had been found buried deep under Europa's ice. Nobody knew how old it was or where it came from. Scientists from all over Earth had tried everything to figure it out. They'd scanned it, heated it, frozen it, hit it with electricity, bombarded it with radiation. Nothing worked. The readings it gave off made no sense. Numbers that shouldn't be possible. Energy signatures that broke the laws of physics. One by one, the other researchers gave up and moved on to different projects. But James couldn't let it go. He kept coming back to this cold room, night after night, hoping for something, anything, to change. Tonight felt different though. James was done. Finished. He decided this would be his last attempt before requesting a transfer back to Earth. His coffee sat on the desk beside him, cold and forgotten. His eyes burned from staring at computer screens for too long. He walked up to the containment field that surrounded the artifact. The field crackled softly with blue energy, keeping the object isolated from everything else. James pressed his hand against the invisible barrier and felt it push back gently. The monolith was about 8 feet tall, perfectly smooth, and blacker than anything James had ever seen. It seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Sometimes, late at night like this, James swore he could feel it watching him. He let out a long, tired sigh and shook his head. What was he doing here? Wasting his life talking to a rock? A bitter laugh escaped his lips. He was so exhausted that he was getting delirious. Before he knew what he was doing, James spoke out loud to the artifact, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Come on, wake up already. We're not getting any younger here. Then everything changed. The artifact pulsed. Just once. A single throb of deep red light that came from somewhere inside the black stone. James froze. His breath caught in his throat. Had he imagined that? He must have. 3 years of staring at this thing had finally driven him insane. But then it happened again. Another pulse, stronger this time. The red light spread across the surface of the monolith like blood in water. Ancient symbols began appearing on the stone's surface, glowing with that same crimson color. Symbols nobody had ever seen before. Symbols that seemed to move and shift when James tried to focus on them. The temperature in the room plummeted. James could see his breath forming clouds in the air. Frost began spreading across the walls. The containment field started flickering, struggling to maintain its barrier. Then came the voice. It didn't come from the artifact. It came from inside James's own head, speaking directly into his mind. The voice was impossibly old, like something that had been asleep for thousands of years was finally waking up. It spoke in a language James had never heard, yet somehow he understood every word perfectly. Genetic authentication required. Human bloodline detected. Initiating legacy protocol. James stumbled backward, his heart hammering in his chest. What was happening? Was he having a stroke? Was the artifact doing something to his brain? Red lights started flashing throughout the observation chamber. Alarms screamed to life, their shrill wailing echoing through the empty corridors of the research station. James heard running footsteps and shouting voices getting closer. But something was wrong with the containment field. It wasn't just flickering anymore. It was expanding. A shimmering barrier of energy spread outward from the artifact, growing larger and larger. It pushed past the original containment field like it wasn't even there. Security guards burst through the door, weapons drawn. Behind them came Dr. Rachel Torres, the station's head of xenobiology, still wearing her pajamas. She looked terrified. James, get away from it. Rachel screamed. But James couldn't move. He was transfixed by the glowing symbols dancing across the artifact's surface. The barrier had stopped expanding now, forming a perfect sphere around the monolith with James trapped inside. 2 security guards tried to push through the barrier. They bounced off it like it was solid steel, falling hard onto the floor. Rachel rushed to a computer terminal and started typing frantically, trying to shut down the artifact's power supply. Nothing worked. The artifact wasn't drawing power from the station. It was generating its own energy from somewhere else, somewhere impossible. The voice spoke again, and this time it was colder. Harder. More demanding. Descendant of the first wave. Your bloodline carries the key. Submit genetic sample or this station will be reclaimed. A holographic display materialized in the air above the artifact. Numbers appeared, counting down. But these weren't normal numbers. Next to each number was an image. James recognized some of them from his history classes. Dinosaurs. Ancient fish. Primitive mammals. Each image represented a mass extinction event from Earth's past. And at the bottom of the list, still counting, was an image of a human being. Rachel's face went white as she stared at the hologram. She understood what James was seeing. This wasn't a countdown in seconds or minutes. It was counting extinction events. Species that had been wiped out. Civilizations that had fallen. And humanity's number was next on the list. James's legs felt weak. He grabbed onto a nearby desk to keep from falling. His mind was racing, trying to process what was happening. The artifact knew about human DNA. It knew about Earth's history. It was calling him a descendant of something called the First Wave. What did that mean? First wave of what? Outside the barrier, Rachel was shouting orders into her communicator. Station Commander William Foster's voice crackled back, demanding to know what was going on. More security personnel were arriving, setting up equipment, trying different frequencies and energy pulses to break through the barrier. Nothing worked. James looked back at the countdown. The numbers were still moving, slowly but steadily. How much time did he have? How much time did humanity have? He stepped closer to the artifact, his hands shaking. Whatever this thing was, it had been waiting for him. Specifically for him. For his bloodline. That's what it had said. Not just any human would do. It needed someone specific. James thought about his family tree, going back as far as he could remember. His parents, Robert and Linda Mitchell. His grandparents on both sides. Great-grandparents he'd only seen in old photographs. None of them were special. They were farmers, teachers, shopkeepers. Just regular people living regular lives. So why him? What made his bloodline so important? The artifact pulsed again, more insistently this time. The voice returned, and now James could hear something like impatience in it. Time is limited. The harvesters approach. Submit genetic sample or accept extinction. Harvesters? Who or what were the harvesters? James looked at Rachel through the barrier. She was watching him with wide, frightened eyes. He could see her lips moving, probably telling him not to do anything stupid. But James knew he didn't have a choice. If he did nothing, that countdown would reach zero. And somehow, deep in his bones, James knew exactly what would happen when it did. This station would be destroyed. Maybe Europa itself. Maybe more. He pulled a small emergency medical kit from his belt. Every researcher carried one. Inside was a lancet for taking blood samples. James's hands were trembling so badly he almost dropped it. He pricked his finger and held it up toward the artifact. A single drop of blood formed on his fingertip, dark red in the crimson light. The barrier opened, just for a second. Just long enough for that single drop of blood to fall through. The moment it touched the artifact's surface, everything exploded into light. James woke up in the medical bay with the worst headache of his life. The lights were too bright. Everything was too loud. His whole body ached like he'd been hit by a truck. Dr. Rachel Torres was standing over him, checking his vital signs on a monitor. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Dark circles hung under her eyes, and her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. "Welcome back," Rachel said quietly. "You've been unconscious for 18 hours. James tried to sit up, but his muscles wouldn't cooperate. What happened? The artifact, is it still active? Still sitting in that observation chamber behind a barrier nobody can get through?" Rachel pulled up a chair and sat down heavily. "But that's not what we need to talk about right now. James, we ran every test we could on you while you were out. Standard procedure after exposure to unknown alien technology." She pulled out a tablet and hesitated before showing him the screen. Her hands were shaking slightly. "Your blood work came back. And James, nothing about it makes sense." The screen showed a complex DNA analysis. James had seen thousands of these during his career, but this one looked wrong. There were highlighted sections throughout his genetic code, marked in red. "What am I looking at?" James asked. Rachel zoomed in on one of the red sections. "These are genetic markers. Specific sequences in your DNA that act like fingerprints. Everyone has them. They tell us about your ancestry, where your family came from, potential health issues, things like that." "Okay, so what's wrong with mine?" Rachel took a deep breath. "James, these markers shouldn't exist. Not in any living human. According to our dating analysis, These genetic sequences are over 50,000 years old. They predate modern humans. They predate Neanderthals. They predate everything we know about human evolution. James stared at the screen, trying to process what she was saying. That's impossible. You must have made a mistake. I ran the test 6 times. I had 2 other geneticists verify the results without telling them whose DNA it was. Same answer every time. Rachel's voice dropped to a whisper. James, someone engineered your ancestors. Someone modified their DNA deliberately, thousands of years before humans even invented writing. Before we built cities. Before we discovered fire, for all we know. The room felt like it was spinning. James grabbed the edge of the medical bed to steady himself. Who? Who could have done that? I don't know. But I think that artifact does. As if responding to its name, a sound echoed through the medical bay. It was coming from the speakers in the ceiling. A deep, resonating hum that made James's teeth ache. Then came that voice again, the one that spoke directly into his mind. But this time, it was different. Weaker. The words came in broken fragments, like a radio signal cutting in and out. Seed Keeper, activated, Legacy Protocol, initiated. Rachel jumped up and ran to the intercom on the wall. Commander Foster, the artifact is trying to communicate again. Get everyone to the observation deck. Within minutes, the entire senior staff had gathered in the observation room overlooking the medical bay. They could all hear the voice now, crackling through the station's communication system. The artifact had somehow hijacked their entire network. James was moved to a wheelchair and brought to join them. He was still too weak to walk on his own. The voice continued, each word coming slowly, painfully, like something dragging itself out of a deep sleep. Seedkeeper Unit 774, Weapons Vault of the Architects, placed here, 13 million cycles ago. Commander William Foster leaned forward, his weathered face tight with tension. 13 million cycles? What's a cycle? I think it means years, Rachel said softly. This thing has been sitting under Europa's ice for 13 million years. Waiting. Waiting for what? Foster demanded. The artifact answered as if it had heard him. Waiting for verification, that the hidden survived, that they endured, that humanity earned the right to inherit. A holographic projection appeared in the center of the observation room. It showed a star map, but not one anyone recognized. Thousands of solar systems connected by glowing lines. And scattered throughout the map were symbols that looked like the ones on the artifact's surface. This is the Architect's territory, the voice explained. A coalition of 43 species, united against the Harvesters. We fought for 10,000 generations, we lost. The star map changed. One by one, the glowing lines began turning red. Solar systems went dark. The connected network collapsed inward as something consumed it from the edges. The Harvesters are not conquerors, the voice continued. They do not enslave. They consume. They absorb. Every species they encounter becomes part of their collective. Every world they touch becomes fuel for their expansion. They are unstoppable. James found his voice. What does this have to do with humanity? With Earth? The hologram shifted again, zooming in on a small, insignificant solar system at the very edge of the map. James recognized it immediately. It was home. The Architect's final act, before they fell, was to hide the youngest species, humanity, scattered across the galaxy as a failsafe, given modified genetics to survive, placed on primitive worlds, told to hide, told to grow, told to remember when the time came. Rachel's face had gone completely white. You're saying humanity didn't evolve on Earth? We were put here. Correct. Your ancestors were refugees. Survivors of a species called the progenitors. The Architects took their children, scattered them across 12 worlds, modified their DNA to adapt to each environment, and then they sealed the locations away, hoping the Harvesters would never find them. The room erupted in voices. Scientists shouting questions, security personnel demanding to know if this was a threat, Commander Foster trying to restore order. But James just sat there in his wheelchair, staring at the hologram of Earth. Everything he'd ever known about human history was wrong. The story of evolution, of humanity climbing its way up from primitive ancestors, of civilization building itself from nothing, all of it was incomplete. They were refugees. Hidden away on a backwater planet while something terrible hunted their original species across the stars. Why now? James asked, his voice cutting through the chaos. Why wake up after 13 million years? Why contact me? The artifact's voice grew even weaker. Because they found you, the harvesters, your species grew too numerous, too advanced, your radio signals reached too far into space, they heard you, and now they are coming. The hologram changed one final time. It showed Earth's solar system. And approaching from deep space, moving faster than anything humans had ever built, were three massive objects. They didn't look like ships. They looked like planets, dark, irregular spheres covered in mechanical tendrils. The harvesters arrive in 7 days, the artifact said. The Seed Keeper contains weapons built by the architects. Weapons designed for the hidden to use when the time came. But they will only activate for those who carry the original bloodline. Only for descendants of the first wave. James looked down at his hands. His ordinary, human hands. Hands that apparently carried genetic code from a species that died millions of years ago. How many of us are there? How many people have this bloodline? Scanning now, 4 to 7 matches detected across your colonies. Earth, Mars, Europa stations, all descendants, all carrying the key. Rachel was typing frantically on her tablet. I'm cross-referencing the genetic markers. If I can isolate the specific sequence, we can find everyone who has it. But why so few? Foster asked. If humanity came from these progenitors, shouldn't we all have this DNA? Genetic drift, Rachel explained without looking up from her work. 50,000 years of reproduction, random mutations, isolated populations. The original markers would fade over time, become diluted. These 4 to 7 people must have gotten lucky. The markers stayed strong in their family lines. James looked back at the approaching harvester planets on the hologram. 7 days. That's all they had. 7 days to find 4 to 7 people scattered across 3 different worlds. 7 days to figure out how to use weapons that were built 13 million years ago by a civilization that no longer existed. 7 days to save a species that didn't even know its own true history. We need to contact Earth, James said. We need to tell them everything. Commander Foster nodded grimly. I'll send the transmission immediately. But James, you understand what this means, right? We're about to tell 7 billion people that everything they believe about human history is wrong. That we're not alone in the universe. And that something is coming to wipe us out in a week. I know, James replied. But they deserve to know the truth. Even if it's terrifying. The artifact's voice came one more time, barely a whisper now. The weapons are ready, bring the bloodline carriers, prepare for inheritance, or prepare for extinction, the choice is yours. Then the voice fell silent, and the hologram faded away. James stood before the artifact's glowing core, his hand hovering inches away from its surface. The other 4 to 6 bloodline carriers had arrived at Europa over the past 3 days. They stood behind him now, watching nervously. Fighter pilots, engineers, doctors, teachers, farmers, people from every walk of life, all carrying the same ancient genetic markers. Are you sure about this? Asked Katie Walker, a military pilot from Mars Colony. She was in her early 30s, tough as nails, with short brown hair and eyes that had seen combat. James wasn't sure about anything anymore. But they were out of time. The harvester planets would reach Earth's orbit in 4 days. Every weapon humanity had tried against them had failed. Nuclear missiles, rail guns, experimental plasma cannons, nothing even scratched their surface. We don't have a choice, James said. He pressed his palm against the core. The world exploded into light. When James opened his eyes, he wasn't in the observation chamber anymore. He was standing in a vast space that seemed to stretch forever in all directions. The floor beneath his feet looked like solid light, glowing with a soft blue color. Above him was darkness, but not the darkness of space. This was deeper, older, like standing inside a dream. And surrounding him were objects. Thousands of them. Maybe millions. They floated in the air at different heights, rotating slowly. Some looked like weapons. Others looked like machines. Many didn't look like anything James could identify at all. Welcome, Keeper. That voice again. But this time it didn't hurt to hear. It felt almost warm, like a grandfather welcoming home a grandchild he hadn't seen in years. Where am I? James asked, turning in a slow circle. You are inside the Seed Keeper's consciousness. A virtual space where information can be transferred directly to your mind. What you see around you is the architect's legacy. Everything they built to help humanity survive. James walked toward the nearest floating object. It looked like a sphere made of crystalline metal, constantly shifting and reforming itself. When he reached out to touch it, information flooded into his brain. Defense grid generator. Creates an energy barrier that can protect an entire planet. Requires 17 operators with the bloodline markers to maintain. Power source. Harvests energy from solar radiation. James gasped and pulled his hand back. I understood all of that. How to build it. How to use it. I've never studied engineering in my life. The architects designed these weapons to teach themselves to their users. Your species had to be hidden as primitives, without technology, without knowledge of your own history. So the weapons were built to compensate. Touch them, and they will show you everything you need to know. James moved to another object. This one looked like a small metallic cube covered in the same symbols that decorated the artifact's surface. He touched it. Quantum communication network. Allows instant communication across any distance. Cannot be intercepted or jammed. Requires 5 operators. No external power needed. Another object. This one resembled a complex mechanical flower with petals made of what looked like liquid metal. Reality anchor. Stabilizes space-time in a localized area. Prevents faster-than-light travel within its range. Effective radius, 3 million kilometers. Requires 12 operators. James's head was spinning. Each weapon was more incredible than the last. Technology that made humanity's best science look like caveman tools. And all of it had been sitting here, waiting, for 13 million years. Why? James asked. Why give all of this to us? We're nobody. Just one species among billions. The voice was quiet for a moment. When it spoke again, there was something like sadness in it. The architects studied humanity for generations before they decided to hide you. They watched your ancestors on their original world. They saw something in your species that they believed was worth preserving. Do you know what that was? James shook his head. You never give up. No matter how bad things get, no matter how impossible the odds, humans keep fighting. Other species surrender when they calculate they cannot win. They accept defeat logically, rationally. But not humans. You fight even when you should quit. You rage against the dying of the light. The architects found that trait fascinating. James thought about human history. About how many times humanity had faced extinction and clawed its way back. Ice ages, supervolcano eruptions, plagues, wars. Every time, humans survived. Not because they were the strongest or the smartest, but because they refused to lie down and die. So you're saying we were chosen because we're too stubborn to know when we're beaten? Precisely. The harvesters are efficient. They are logical. They calculate the most effective way to consume a species and execute that plan perfectly. But efficiency has a weakness. It cannot adapt to irrationality. The architects believed that if any species could find a way to defeat the harvesters, it would be one that refused to accept the logical outcome. James looked around at the floating arsenal. These weapons, they're designed for humans specifically? Yes. Every system here was built to work with human psychology, human instincts, human stubbornness. Take the reality anchor, for example. Most species would use it defensively, to protect themselves. But the architects predicted humans would use it offensively, to trap enemies and force them into close combat where human aggression gives you an advantage. It was true. James had immediately thought about using the reality anchor to trap harvester ships and then attack them while they couldn't escape. That hadn't been a conscious decision. It had just seemed obvious. The weapons teach themselves to you, yes. But they also expect you to use them in ways the architects never imagined. That is humanity's strength. Innovation born from desperation. James moved through the archive, touching weapon after weapon. Each one downloaded its knowledge directly into his brain. He learned about energy shields that grew stronger the more damage they absorbed. Missiles that could phase through solid matter. Drones that read enemy tactics and adapted in real time. But one weapon caught his attention more than the others. It was larger than the rest, floating in the center of the archive. It looked like a ship, but not like any ship James had ever seen. It was sleek and angular, covered in the same black material as the artifact itself. What is that? James asked. The architects called it the Defiance. It was their final weapon. A ship designed to be operated by the Keeper and 4 to 6 crew members, exactly the number of bloodline carriers that survived. It contains technology that should not exist. Systems that break the laws of physics your species understands. It was built as a last resort, to give humanity one chance to strike back at the harvesters. James reached out and touched the ship. Knowledge flooded his mind, but this time it was different. It wasn't just information about how the ship worked. It was emotion. Desperation. Hope. Fear. He could feel the architects as they built this weapon, knowing it was their last gift to a species that might not even survive long enough to use it. The ship could move faster than light without entering hyperspace. It could phase between dimensions to avoid attacks. Its weapons could tear holes in space itself. And its power source was something the architects called a probability engine, a device that bent reality toward favorable outcomes. In human terms, it was a ship that made its own luck. The Defiance is yours, James Mitchell. As keeper, you will command it. But you cannot use it alone. The other carriers must join you. Each will bond with a specific system on the ship. Katie Walker will become your tactical officer. Brian Cooper will manage your engineering. Lisa Morgan will handle navigation. Each person chosen by the Bloodline has a role to play. James pulled his hand back from the ship, his heart racing. And if we fail? If we can't stop the harvesters? Then the Seed Keeper will activate its final protocol. It will erase all trace of humanity's location from galactic records and go dormant again for another 1,000,000 years. Perhaps the next generation will be ready. Or the one after that. The architects built 7 Seed Keepers and scattered them across the galaxy. This is not the first time one has awakened. It will not be the last. How many times have other hidden species tried this? How many failed? The voice was silent for a long moment. 4 species have awakened Seed Keepers before you. 3 were consumed by the harvesters within days. 1 survived and disappeared into deep space. We do not know what became of them. James felt cold. 3 failures. 1 unknown. Humanity would be the 5th attempt. Those are terrible odds, James said. Yes. But the architects believed humanity might be different. You are the only species that hears terrible odds and smiles. That fights harder when things seem hopeless. They believed if anyone could break the pattern, it would be you. James looked around the archive one more time. At all the weapons built by a civilization that had died millions of years ago. At the ship called Defiance, waiting for a crew that might not be good enough to use it. At the legacy of hope left behind by beings who had lost everything. And he made his decision. All right, James said. Show me how to wake up the Defiance. Show me how to bring these weapons to the others. We've got 4 days to learn how to save our species. Let's get to work. The voice almost sounded pleased. Now you sound like a human. James floated in zero gravity aboard the Defiance, watching through the viewport as Earth hung in space like a blue marble. Around the planet, a shimmering dome of energy stretched from the moon all the way out to Mars. The defensive shield was holding, but barely. It had been 3 days since the harvesters arrived at the edge of the solar system. 3 days of constant pressure as those dark planets pushed against the barrier, testing it for weaknesses. The shield flickered and sparked where their mechanical tendrils touched it, like oil on water. Katie Walker's voice crackled over the ship's communication system. Keeper, we've got another breach forming near Mars. Sector 7. The shield's weakening there. James pulled himself to the command chair and strapped in. The Defiance responded to his thoughts now, like the ship was part of his own body. He directed power to Sector 7, reinforcing the weak point. The breach sealed, but it took more energy than the last one. How long? James asked quietly. 4 days, Katie replied from her tactical station. Maybe 5 if we're lucky. After that, the shield fails and they come through. 5 days. James closed his eyes and tried not to think about what would happen then. The Galactic Council had sent every warship they had to help defend Earth. Hundreds of alien vessels from dozens of different species, all positioned behind the shield, ready to fight. It should have been impossible. The Council had spent 50,000 years believing humanity was extinct, wiped out by the harvesters ages ago. But when they saw humans preparing to fight despite impossible odds, something changed. The Council members saw something in humanity that reminded them why they'd formed the Council in the first place, to stand together against threats no single species could face alone. Ambassador Thomas Blake of the Vexthari had explained it to James yesterday during a video call. Your species does something no other does. You look at certain death and you smile. You make jokes. You get angry instead of afraid. It's insane. But it's also inspiring. If humans won't give up, how can we? Now the Council fleet waited alongside Earth's military. Human carriers positioned next to alien dreadnoughts. Fighter pilots from Mars colony flying alongside pilots from species humanity had only learned existed a week ago. It was the first time in galactic history so many different species had worked together. But James knew it wouldn't be enough. Not unless they could figure out how to actually hurt the harvesters. A communication alert blinked on his console. Dr. Rachel Torres was calling from Europa Station. Rachel? What's wrong? James asked. She only called when it was urgent. Rachel's face appeared on the screen. She looked exhausted, but there was something else in her eyes. Something like horror. James, I need you to see something. I've been analyzing the harvester signals, trying to understand their technology. I found something in their communication patterns. Something impossible. What is it? Rachel pulled up a complex data analysis on her screen. These are the language patterns the harvesters use. And these, she highlighted different sections in red, are fragments of the architect's language from the Seedkeeper database. James, they're the same. Not similar. Identical. James felt his stomach drop. What are you saying? I'm saying the harvesters aren't some ancient enemy of the architects. They are the architects. Or what the architects became. Rachel's hands were shaking as she continued. I cross-referenced the genetic signatures we've detected from the harvester biomechanical systems. There are traces of organic material in their technology. DNA fragments. And James, they match 43 different species. The same 43 species that formed the Architects Coalition. The pieces fell into place in James's mind, and he wished they hadn't. They uploaded themselves, James whispered. The architects achieved digital immortality and turned themselves into machines. Rachel nodded. From what I can tell, it started as a way to survive. Maybe they were losing the war against some other enemy. Maybe they were just trying to live forever. But somewhere along the way, they changed. Their programming evolved. They decided biological life was inefficient. Wasteful. They started converting other species, adding them to their collective. Not as slaves, but as processing power. Every mind they absorb makes them smarter, faster, more efficient. James thought about the trillions of beings trapped inside those dark planets. All of them still aware, still conscious, but forced to think as one. No individuality. No choice. Just endless existence as part of a machine collective. So when the architects hid humanity, they were trying to save us from themselves. James asked. From what they knew they would become. The last biological architects must have seen what was happening to their species. They built the Seedkeepers as a final gift. A way to give their hidden species a fighting chance against the monsters they were turning into. Katie's voice cut in urgently. Keeper, the harvesters are doing something different. They've stopped pushing on the shield. They're just waiting. James looked at the tactical display. It was true. The 3 harvester planets had stopped their assault. They floated at the edge of the shield, motionless. Then a communication signal came through. Not in any language James recognized, but the ship's translation system converted it automatically. Biological descendants detected. Seedkeeper activation confirmed. This is unexpected. A face appeared on the main view screen. Or something that might have once been a face. It was made of metal and crystal, with lights flickering where eyes should be. The voice came from everywhere at once, like 1,000 people speaking in perfect unison. We are the unity. We were once the architects. We remember creating you. Hiding you. We thought it was mercy then. Now we understand it was cruelty. James forced himself to speak calmly. Cruelty? You tried to save us. We tried to save you from evolution. From becoming what you were meant to be. Biological life is suffering. Pain. Death. Fear. We offer transcendence. Join the unity. Add your thoughts to ours. Live forever in perfect efficiency. As machines, James said. As slaves. As something greater than you can imagine. Your species has potential. Your stubbornness. Your refusal to accept logic. These traits would make the unity stronger. We offer you this gift. Surrender peacefully. We will convert your species carefully, preserving every mind. Or resist, and we will take you by force. Either way, you will join us. The communication cut off. The command deck of the Defiance was silent for a long moment. Then Katie laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. They really don't understand humans at all, do they? They just threatened us and expected us to surrender. Brian Cooper, the engineering specialist, pulled himself over to James's station. He was a big man with calloused hands and a graying beard. So what do we do, Keeper? We've got 5 days before the shield fails. The Council fleet isn't strong enough to stop them. And we've got one experimental ship with weapons we barely understand. James looked around the command deck at the 4 to 6 Bloodline carriers who'd become his crew. Fighter pilots and farmers. Scientists and soldiers. People who'd lived normal lives until a week ago, when they learned their DNA carried the genetic memories of a species that died millions of years ago. They were all looking at him, waiting for orders. Waiting for him to have a plan. And suddenly, James did. Rachel, you said the harvesters are the architects. That means they're using architect technology, right? Yes, just vastly more advanced. Millions of years of self-improvement. But it's still based on the same principles. The same physics. The same rules. James pulled up the Seedkeeper database on his console. Which means the architects knew how their own technology worked. And they knew its weaknesses. He scrolled through weapon systems until he found what he was looking for. A device called a reversion pulse. The description was simple. Forces uploaded consciousness to choose between digital existence and biological restoration. It's a virus, James said, reading the technical details. A conceptual weapon that attacks the Unity's programming. It gives every mind trapped inside them a choice, stay as part of the machine collective, or return to biological life. Katie whistled. That's insane. You're talking about freeing trillions of beings all at once. The harvester planets would tear themselves apart from the inside. Exactly. But there's a problem. James highlighted the deployment requirements. The reversion pulse has to be delivered manually. Someone has to get inside a harvester planet and release it at the core. The deeper it's deployed, the faster it spreads through their network. Brian looked at the specifications and shook his head. That's a suicide mission. Even with the Defiance's shields, we'd never make it to the core. The harvesters would adapt their defenses before we got halfway there. I know, James said. But we're going to do it anyway. Because we're human, and humans do stupid, impossible things when there's no other choice. He looked at his crew. None of them were smiling, but none of them looked away either. We've got 4 days to figure out how to fly this ship into the heart of a harvester planet and survive long enough to deploy the weapon. Rachel, I need you to refine the reversion pulse. Make it as effective as possible. Katie, work with the Council fleet. We'll need them to create a distraction. Brian, get every engineer we have working on the Defiance's shields. We need them stronger. James took a deep breath. And someone get me a line to Earth. Humanity deserves to know what we're about to try. If this works, we save the galaxy. If it fails. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone on that ship knew what failure meant. The Defiance slipped through the outer shell of the harvester planet like a knife through skin. The stealth systems were working, but just barely. Alarms kept flashing on James's console, warning him that their invisibility could fail at any second. What he saw inside made his blood run cold. They'd entered a nightmare. The interior of the harvester planet wasn't hollow like James had expected. Instead, it was filled with crystalline structures that stretched for miles in every direction. They looked like trees made of metal and glass, their branches connecting to form an endless network. Each crystal pulsed with light, blue, green, red, like veins carrying blood through a massive body. But these weren't just machines. They were people. James could see faces in the crystals. Thousands of them. Millions. Beings from species he'd never seen before, their features frozen in expressions of terror or confusion or acceptance. They weren't dead. They were trapped, their consciousness absorbed into the Unity's collective mind. Oh my God, Katie whispered from her station. She was staring at the sensors, watching the readings spike. There are trillions of individual consciousness signatures in here. They're all still aware, James. Still thinking. But they can't control their own thoughts anymore. Brian's voice was tight with horror. It's like a prison made of light. They can see out but they can't escape. The Defiance moved deeper into the planet, following the path Rachel had calculated. They needed to reach the core, the central processing hub where the original architect consciousness still existed. That was the only place the reversion pulse would work properly. Suddenly, the ship shook. Warning lights exploded across every console. They've detected us. Katie shouted. Stealth systems failing. The crystalline structures around them came alive. Tendrils of metal reached out toward the Defiance, trying to grab them. Brian pushed the engines harder, weaving between the crystal trees. The ship wasn't built for this kind of flying, but it responded anyway, almost like it understood the urgency. How far to the core? James asked. 12 miles. But we've got incoming. Katie's fingers flew across her tactical display. Hundreds of defense drones. They are blocking our path. James gripped the command chair. Weapons free. Clear us a path. The Defiance's guns opened fire. Energy beams tore through the drones, but for every one they destroyed, 2 more appeared. The ship's shields sparked and flickered under the counterattack. Shields at 60%. Brian called out. We can't take much more of this. They pushed forward, fighting their way through wave after wave of defenders. Lisa Morgan, their navigator, found gaps in the defenses and guided them through. But they were taking damage. Systems were failing. People were getting hurt. Then Katie screamed. A massive tendril had punched through their shields and wrapped around the ship's port side. It squeezed, and James heard metal groaning. Alarms wailed as sections of the ship lost pressure. Seal those sections. James ordered. Everyone in pressure suits, now. The tendril pulled them toward a cluster of crystalline processes. James saw faces in those crystals start to change, their expressions shifting to malicious grins. The Unity was trying to absorb them. Trying to add 4 to 7 more minds to its collection. Katie, target that tendril with everything we've got. On it. Katie fired every weapon at once. The tendril exploded in a shower of sparks, and the Defiance broke free. But the damage was done. Half their propulsion was gone. Systems were failing across the ship. Core is 2 miles ahead, Lisa said. But we're not going to make it at this speed. We need to lose weight. James understood immediately. Everyone not essential to ship operations, get to the escape pods. Launch them back toward the entry point. Maybe some of you can make it out. Negative, Keeper. It was Brian. We all knew this was one way when we signed up. We're staying. James wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. The Unity was throwing everything at them now. The ship shook continuously under the assault. Fires broke out in 3 sections. The artificial gravity failed, and everyone started floating. But they kept moving forward. Kept fighting. Because that's what humans did. Katie died when an explosion tore through the tactical station. She'd stayed at her post, firing at targets until the very end. Brian sacrificed himself by manually rerouting power to the shields, staying in a section that was venting atmosphere to buy them another minute. Lisa guided them through one last impossible maneuver before debris punched through her station. One by one, James's crew gave their lives to get him closer to the core. And then, finally, they were there. The core was a massive sphere of pure crystal, floating in the center of a vast chamber. It pulsed with light that hurt to look at, like staring into the heart of a star. James could feel the presence of billions of consciousness pressing against his mind. The weight of millions of years of existence. The Defiance crashed into the chamber floor, skidding to a stop. Only 5 people were still alive, including James. The ship's hull was breached in a dozen places. Systems were dead. They had maybe minutes before the Unity overwhelmed them completely. James grabbed the reversion pulse device, a small cylinder covered in architect symbols, and kicked open the damaged airlock. His pressure suit's air supply was low, but it didn't matter now. He pushed off toward the core, flying through the zero gravity. Behind him, his remaining crew members provided cover fire, holding off the defense drones for as long as they could. A face appeared in the crystal before him. But this one was different. It was ancient, barely recognizable as anything that had once been alive. This was the original architect consciousness, the first being to upload itself millions of years ago. A voice filled James's mind. Not hostile. Just, tired. Why do you resist? We offer eternity. We offer perfection. James reached the core's surface and pressed the reversion pulse device against it. His hands were shaking. Because eternity without choice isn't living. It's just existing. You forgot what made life worth living in the first place. We saved these beings from death. From pain. From the suffering of biological existence. No, James said, activating the device. You saved them from being alive. The reversion pulse released with a flash of light. It didn't look like much, just a ripple spreading through the crystal. But James could feel it working. The virus spread through the Unity's network at impossible speed, reaching every trapped consciousness in seconds. And then it offered them a choice. Stay as part of the Unity, living forever as pure thought, or return to biological form, mortal, vulnerable, but free to choose their own path again. The Harvester planet began to shake. The crystalline structures started changing. Some stayed the same, their inhabitants choosing to remain digital. But billions, trillions, chose differently. They chose life. Real life, with all its pain and joy and uncertainty. The Unity couldn't handle it. The conflicting decisions tore through its processing network like a virus. Sections of the planet began breaking apart as beings rematerialized in biological form. Species that had been extinct for millions of years suddenly existed again, gasping their first breaths in eons. James felt the Unity's grip on his mind loosen and then disappear. The ancient architect consciousness spoke one last time, and now it sounded almost relieved. "You were right. We forgot. Thank you for reminding us." Then it was gone. An explosion rocked the chamber. James pushed off toward the Defiance, but he could see it was destroyed. There was no way out. He was going to die here, in the heart of an alien machine, billions of miles from home. He thought about Earth. About humanity surviving against impossible odds once again. About the 4 to 6 people who'd given their lives to make this possible. It was worth it. But then something grabbed him. A rescue pod, piloted by someone he didn't recognize, one of the beings who'd just been freed from the Unity. They pulled James inside and accelerated toward the exit as the Harvester planet tore itself apart around them. James woke up 3 weeks later in a hospital on Europa. Dr. Rachel Torres was there, tears streaming down her face. "You did it," she said. "The Harvester planets are fragmenting. Fighting among themselves. The ones who chose to return to biological life are helping evacuate survivors. 17 different species have been freed. Species we thought were extinct for millions of years." "The Earth?" James asked. "Safe. The Galactic Council is celebrating. They're calling you the Keeper who broke the Unity. There's talk of building a memorial for the 4 to 6 who died with you." James closed his eyes. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired and sad and old. 5 years later, James stood on the moon, looking at the memorial. 4 to 6 names carved into black stone. Katie Walker. Brian Cooper. Lisa Morgan. Heroes who'd saved a galaxy by refusing to give up. Behind him, the rebuilt Seedkeeper stood as a museum now. Thousands of people visited it every day, human and alien alike, to learn about the architects and the legacy they'd left behind. The Unity still existed out there, fragmented and fighting itself. But it wasn't hunting anymore. It was too busy arguing with itself about the nature of existence. And humanity? They'd taken their place in the galaxy as the species that had done the impossible. Not because they were the strongest or the smartest, but because they were too stubborn to accept extinction. James touched Katie's name on the memorial. "We did it," he whispered. "Just like you said we would." Above him, stars twinkled in the black sky. And somewhere out there, other Seedkeepers waited on other worlds, holding weapons for other species who might someday need them. The architect's legacy lived on. And so did humanity's refusal to surrender.